Hello and welcome to The Virtuous Life. I'm your host, Pat Odie Murray. And today I'm really excited. I'm actually talking to somebody in Australia. God bless this woman. I don't even know what time it is there. But it is Tracey Rowland, Dr. Tracey Rowland. Rowland, I'll get that right. She holds the St. John Paul II Chair of Theology at the University of Notre Dame in Australia. From 2014 to 2019, she was a member of the International Theological Commission. And in 2020, she won the Ratzinger Prize for Theology. And in 2023, she was appointed to the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. In 2024, she was awarded an honorary doctorate by Christendom College, and we've had people on from Christendom. She is a patron of the Australian Catholic Students Association. Wonderful bio. Welcome, Dr. Rowland.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I want to let the audience know we're talking about a book called Remembering George Cardinal Pell, Reflections of a Great Man of the Church. And I kind of let the audience know, usually this is going to air in the month of October for us, Dr. Rowland. And, we are in the month of October, but later in the month.
Yes.
And we kind of do a series on saints sometimes during this month. But I have just been just so impressed with the more I learn about Cardinal Pell. And we're going to talk a little bit more about white martyrdom, things like that, because that's been mentioned in reference to him. So I want to dig right in, Dr. Rowland, and I want to know, how did this book originate? And were these brief kind of remembrances of him written just for this book? Can you give us a little insight into it?
Mm-hmm. Almost all of them were written just for the book. And the idea of the book, it was sort of suggested to me by a friend at Cardinal Pell's funeral. So as we were literally sort of waiting for the casket to be lowered down into its final resting place, people were sort of quietly talking to one another, and one of my friends suggested this concept to me. And so, yes, I said, yes, it sounds like a good idea. And it came together. So I think in all bar about 3 cases, the memoirs were written specifically for the book. But you'll note towards the end, there are some homilies.
Yes.
And the homilies were not written for the book, but were delivered at special masses for the cardinal. And so I included those as well.
Now, how were these people chosen to write for this book? Because there's numerous, all different areas, political, religious, friends, family. How did you decide?
I made a list of people I knew the cardinal knew who might contribute, and then I contacted a few people and said, who do you think I should invite? And so, I sort of came up with a list, and some people were just like too busy. There were about another half a dozen cardinals on my list I would have liked to have got. But, they had never heard of me, and, I'm dealing with their private secretaries. And, of course, if I didn't know somebody, never heard of them, and they're asking me to contribute to a book, I'd probably not be too keen to do so either. But I at least tried.
Right.
I think a couple may have contributed if they had time, but sort of felt as though they didn't. And I think a few people were just a bit daunted by the concept. When I approached Ignatius Press with the idea, they said, yes, but we don't want submissions to the Congregation for the Causes of the Saints. And so I'm sort of writing to people and saying, well, this is what Ignatius Press said. They don't want hagiographies.
Right.
They want anecdotes, personal stories from friends. And so I think for some people that was a bit daunting. I was asking them to write in a kind of genre of writing they're not accustomed to doing. So I think some people thought it was a bit above their pay grade.
Yeah.
So, in the end, I got those I could get.
Yeah. Oh, and they're wonderful. They really are. And I would tend to think too, it's got to be hard to write in a way that doesn't almost want to canonize him. I mean, because, you're telling all these wonderful things about him, but very honest things too. So I can understand that they might have a kind of trouble kind of sorting this out. I'm not really trying to make him a saint, but, he was a great guy. So
that's it. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of people really struggled with that.
Yeah.
And I thought the person who didn't struggle with it was Cardinal Dolan.
Yeah.
And I thought Cardinal Dolan, really kind of followed the brief.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was excellent.
People really struggled with it.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your, how did you come to know Cardinal Pell? Because I would take it that's one of the reasons you took on this project, right?
Yes. Well, I knew him. I met him when he was a mere auxiliary bishop of Melbourne. And in those years, there was something called the Tertiary Catholic Fellowship of Australia, which was a national student body, and it was a bit crazy, The two stories I tell to explain that to people are that on one occasion in one of their newsletters, they were promoting Sophia as the fourth person of the Godhead.
Ooh.
So they went down some really crazy feminist theology rabbit hole and came up with that. And Archbishop Fisher, who you may have heard of, he's the Dominican Archbishop of Sydney. He remembers being invited to a swimming pool mass when he was an undergraduate. Okay. So, it was a student body, but in a national student body for Catholic students. But a lot of us thought that we didn't really kind of fit in with the kind of things that were happening there.
Sure.
And so eventually a new national student body was created called the Australian Catholic Students Association, and Cardinal Pell agreed to be a patron of that.
Okay.
And I became a co-patron. So I was like the lay patron and he was the ecclesial patron. And so that was the kind of project we worked on together. But in general, he was a guy who was very interested in students, very interested in young Catholic professionals. He wasn't at all clerical, and he had many friends who were just lay Catholics. And he sort of knew who the young leading Catholic intellectuals were, and he made a point of getting to know us.
Yeah. I was amazed at by reading this book, I just got such a sense of how much he cared about people and wanted to know them. I mean, like it wasn't like he was telling you all about himself all the time. He was really trying to get to know the people that he encountered all the time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And a number of the contributors put that down to the fact that he grew up in a pub.
I love that.
And they think, from having, grown up in a hotel where day after day people are coming in to buy drinks, he learnt just how to make conversation with absolutely anyone. And he found people interesting. And so, yes, he had that great capacity to meet someone and sort of get to know them fairly well. And he was interested in, everything about a person, not just what is your standing within the church, but he found the whole personality to be interesting. Yeah.
I found it, I didn't realize, I guess. I mean, I knew he was a bigger guy. I mean, physically a bigger guy. But I didn't realize that he was such a good Australian football player that he could have gotten I don't know, in the United States, we talk about like going to the major leagues or something. But I think it was his brother's reflection that said something about, there were people there to talk to him about doing this. And then it became apparent he was going to go the priesthood instead. And his brother said, oh, man, he's going to be a priest, because I think he was kind of excited about him doing this football thing. That actually played a part in how he took on life too, didn't it?
I think so. Incidentally, his dad wasn't a Catholic. So his dad was a member of the Church of England. And his mum was a Catholic.
Okay.
And so I think when the eldest son, was being headhunted to play A-grade football, it must have been a bit of a disappointment for the Church of England father. Not that his brother really talked about that in the memoir. He didn't really dwell on his father's reaction. No. But I can imagine you've got a son who's being headhunted for A-grade football.
That's exciting.
Salaries. Yeah. And, he says, oh, well, actually, I want to go to the seminary. So anyway, he went to the seminary, and he retained a love of football for the rest of his life. And we always joked that his model of the church was a football team, and he was like the team coach. Right. That, was the kind of relationship he tended to have with a lot of Catholic people, Yeah,
because it's very apparent he was an intellectual. But yet a very common, down to earth kind of guy, and yet he had a lot of style to him too. I'm amazed at how he kind of wrapped all that together.
Yeah, I think that's right. He was an intellectual. If you went into his living room, there were piles of magazines, there were piles of recently released books, but he sort of didn't always engage on that level. Mm-hmm. It just depended upon who the person was. So, if someone was an academic or a journalist, he would maybe start a conversation by saying, well, what have you been reading lately? But if you were not that type of person, he would just as easily start a conversation by saying, which football team do you support and why do you support them? And he'd make some comment about the team they support. And so he could relate on a number of different levels.
Right. Yeah. So did he, when we talk about his vocational call, not a lot of people talked about that in the book. Do you have any insight into, obviously he could have played Major League Football. So how did he discern priesthood? Did that ever come up? Have you ever heard that vocation story?
No, I've never heard the vocation story, actually. He went to school, I guess, in an era when there was still a lot of religious in Catholic schools. Uh-huh. He went to a Christian Brothers school.
Okay.
And I just suspect that, the faith formation at the time was very strong. And I do know that in primary school, he had some problem with his back.
Oh.
And he had a number of operations, as I understand.
Okay.
So that may have, when you suffer as a child, I think that can, lead you to think about sort of deeper things maybe than if you're having a completely stress-free childhood and you're just wondering what is going to be served for dinner that evening. Yeah. It's a different sort of experience of life.
Right.
By all accounts, his family life was very happy. So he had, he had a happy family life. But I think he had a bit of suffering on the medical front in his primary school years, and that may have been a contributing factor.
Yeah.
But I've never heard his sort of vocation story.
Okay. So do you think that he, what was it about him? Because he went, I'm not sure I'm getting this all right, but he was auxiliary bishop. Then he was bishop of, was it Melbourne?
Archbishop of Melbourne. And then he was transferred to Sydney and made Archbishop of Sydney. And in Australia, Sydney is regarded as the primatial see.
Okay.
So I don't know what the equivalent would be in the US, but in Australia, there's an enormous amount of rivalry between Sydney and Melbourne.
Oh.
They're our two big cities.
Got it.
And they're about 7 hours apart by car.
Okay.
90 minutes by air, but massive rivalry between the two cities. And each city has quite a different political culture.
Oh, okay. And he was able to bridge both of those then?
He bridged both of them, but I think he was brought up in Victoria, which has Melbourne as the capital.
Okay.
But because Sydney was the primatial see, John Paul II moved him to Sydney to give him the red hat.
Oh, okay. So that was kind of in the workings then, that idea of being a cardinal. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's nothing to say that you have to be the Archbishop of Sydney to get a red hat, but that had been the precedent.
Okay.
And JP2 sort of followed that.
Okay.
And so he was moved to Sydney, so, in preparation for giving him the red hat.
Yeah. And so he kind of spanned John Paul's papacy, Benedict's papacy, and Francis's papacy. He worked amidst all three of those. And I was surprised to hear that the cardinals kind of pointed to him when people said, "Oh, thank you for giving us Benedict as Pope." They kind of pointed to Pal and said, "Well, thank him." So what kind of a relationship did he have with Pope Benedict prior to his election to the papacy?
Look, he was, I'm pretty sure he was a consultant to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Yeah. And he was often in Rome. He was, he was often asked by St. John Paul II to sit on committees and sort out problems. And so he was the type of archbishop who was frequently in Rome. But I think it would have been through his association or through his work for the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith that he had most direct encounters with Ratzinger. But I think more than that even, he was of the view that to continue the work of the John Paul II papacy, the best man to do that was Ratzinger.
Yeah.
And I think your Cardinal Francis George was of the same opinion.
Yeah.
And if you remember back to that conclave, when Benedict came out onto the balcony, I think there was Cardinal Francis George on one side of him and Cardinal George Pell on the other side of him.
Yeah.
Certainly both your Francis George and our George Pell were great supporters of Pope Benedict.
Yeah, yeah. And you could tell they just had so much trust in Cardinal Pell, that's for sure. I find it interesting because many people kind of in the book said that the man they knew was not the same as the one kind of portrayed to the media or the world. Why do you think that is? Do you think that's true? And then why do you think it is if it is true?
Yeah. I think it's true, and I think it's because of his generation. I think I talk about it in my introduction, and I say that men of his generation did not think it appropriate to show their emotions in public, and there was this idea that if you were a leader of the community, you had to exhibit dignity and sort of gravitas, and you would never dream of sort of crying in public or,
Yeah.
looking sad or looking down. And when we had all the whole horror of the Royal Commission into child abuse and so forth, I think, he got interrogated for hours during that Royal Commission. And, he just sort of kept a stiff upper lip. The expression stiff upper lip is a very British expression.
Right.
Another British expression is keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, in public, he was just stony.
Yeah.
Sort of stoical.
Right.
And so he didn't show a lot of warmth. And also, in many public appearances that had nothing to do with child abuse scandals, he was trying to tell people what the church teaches,
Mm-hmm.
And so journalists would be throwing questions at him and, trying to tell him that the church is behind the times and we should change our teaching. And, he'd just say, no, it's not up to me. The teaching comes from Christ and I have no authority, but this is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so people would see him in a role where he was sort of laying down the law and saying, this is what the church teaches. And this, if you want to be a Catholic, this is what you should believe.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't see that side of him that was very paternal, fun, great sense of humor. That was how he was behind closed doors.
Yeah.
But not so much in public.
Yeah. Yeah. So he seemed to just have his he just did lots of things. In fact, different people that wrote said, they think he was probably the greatest Australian Catholic leader of time, all time right now, up to now. Yeah. So what were some of the things that he did, especially for Australia, that impressed you so much?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I belong to that sort of immediate post-Vatican II generation. So right. I was at school in the 1970s. And it was a period of complete catechetical chaos,
Yes.
Nobody was really sure what the church taught anymore. And there were a lot of changes and a lot of silly changes. In my primary school years, I was taught by some absolutely wonderful nuns, and I really got an excellent grounding in the faith. But when I went to secondary school, I can remember the religious education classes were just sort of, I don't know how to describe them, but, we would be sitting around candles, holding hands, and we'd have to do something like tell the person next to you what is your deepest, what has been your deepest religious experience of God or something. It was all very, very subjective. And I was a kind of shy intellectual type. So for me, it was a huge invasion of personal privacy to have to sit around and share, stories of my spiritual life with other people. And there was just no intellectual content.
Right.
And the end result was like people just kind of stopped going to church when they left school. They had no kind of deep understanding of what the Mass is, what the sacraments are, what sacramentality is. They didn't necessarily give up believing in God, but the church just seemed irrelevant to their lives.
Yeah.
And so Pell sort of came on the scene as someone who recognized that all of this was a problem. And so he really did a lot of work in the space which we would now call re-evangelization.
Right.
He would support lay initiatives. So there were lots of lay people who were very concerned about this state of affairs. And if lay people were, say, running talks for teenagers about this or that aspect of church teaching, he would support those initiatives. And then when he sort of became powerful, so to speak. He, he set up institutions to try and, foster the intellectual life of the faith. So he set up one branch of the University of Notre Dame. Notre Dame had been on one side of the country, but then he got it on the other side of the country as well. He set up a whole range of institutions. He spent around $1 million a year on university chaplaincy work in the Archdiocese of Sydney.
Wow.
Because, he wanted the people who were the university students to be able to get a formation in their faith, which was commensurate with whatever intellectual formation they were getting at university. So he would just bring in the very best people from all over the world to give lectures to the undergraduates.
Yeah.
So he really cared a lot about Catholic education.
Yeah.
And made a huge difference in that space.
Yeah. And I love, we're coming up on the end of the first segment of the show, Dr. Rowland, but I loved that because I've said this too in the past, where he said, I want people to know the faith so they know what they're leaving if they leave.
That's right.
And that's so true. So many people hear stuff, about the church, but they never really know the truth. They haven't learned it. And that was one of the things I appreciated too in this book, was how people talked about how he loved to argue and debate because he wanted to always get to the truth. It wasn't, I'm right, but it was always trying to get to the truth, no matter what he was discussing. So again, just those were some marvelous insights. I'm going to ask the audience to come back on the other side of the break here, and we're going to get more into a little bit more about his life and especially his prison time so that we can understand how his faith in Christ and his love for the church really motivated him in those final years of his life, especially to take on a really hard, difficult job in the Roman Curia, and yet stay faithful. So come back on the other side of the break and join Dr. Rowland and I as we continue to talk about Cardinal George Pell. And you're listening to The Virtuous Life. I'm your host, Pat Odie Murray.
Do you want to put an end to abortion and the contraceptive mentality for good? Do you want to fight against the homosexual agenda and halt the march towards the legalization of same-sex marriage forever? Do you want to ensure religious freedom for ourselves and for our grandchildren? These things are impossible unless we convert the culture. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a grassroots initiative that recognizes this need and takes it to the streets. If you're interested in peacefully sharing your Catholic faith in a non-confrontational way with the people in your area, you can help. To learn more about St. Paul Street Evangelization, visit us at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com. And don't forget to like us on Facebook.
Did you know that no Christian church accepted contraception as morally permissible before 1930? Discover why and how to work with a woman's natural times of being fertile and infertile. Learn a 99% effective method of natural family planning in English or Spanish through classes or home study. Search for a class at the Couple to Couple League's website, ccli.org. or call 800-745-8252.
Welcome back to The Virtuous Life. I'm your host, Pat Odie Murray, and today I'm so excited. We are talking to Dr. Tracey Rowland. She holds the St. John Paul II Chair of Theology at the University of Notre Dame in Australia. She was a member of the International Theological Commission. She won the Ratzinger Prize for Theology. She was appointed to the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. She was awarded an honorary doctorate by Christendom College here in our country, and she's a patron of the Australian Catholic Students Association. But most important today to me is that she is the person who compiled the book that we're talking about, Remembering George Cardinal Pell. Welcome back, Dr. Rowland. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
I want to get into kind of this idea of what brought about this great kind of trial in his life and how he handled it. I think that just we can learn so much from this. So under Pope Francis, when Pope Francis got elected, one of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong here, one of the things that he was concerned about was the Vatican Bank, investments, things like that. There seemed to be money missing. There was fraud. He believed there was fraud going on. So he turned to Cardinal Pell to come in and to take a role in leading kind of this evaluation of what was happening, investigating. So Cardinal Pell said yes. He comes, and I love it because it was his great love for the church. He wanted to root out any kind of fraud that might be there. Can you kind of fill us in what happened when he took this role?
Well, look, I mean, I'm not privy to all the stories. I only know what is known in the public domain, but it is that yes, there was an enormous amount of financial corruption in the Vatican. There was one day when I was in Rome, and I just crossed paths with Cardinal Pell. I was walking into Hotel Santa Marta, and he was walking out of Hotel Santa Marta. And he said to me, "What are you doing here?" And I told him, and then I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I'm trying to find a missing 20 million euro. And that was just a day in his life, right, in that role as prefect for the economy. And he was certainly hated by the people who were involved in that financial corruption. And they were doing everything that they could possibly do to thwart his work. There is a sort of widespread belief that the Italian mafia may have been involved in having false accusations laid against him in Australia just to get him out of Rome. Of course, that's just a theory,
right?
But that's a theory many people think could possibly be true.
Yeah.
But also, I think it helps to understand that the state of Victoria it's hard to describe what the state of Victoria is like, but the person who was the premier of that state, a role a little bit analogous to your state governor role, that person recently went to China and for, Premier Xi's big military parade, and he was photographed standing 2 people or 3 people down from Premier Xi in that lineup. In other words, he remains to the left of almost anyone you could possibly imagine.
Right.
Victoria is sort of like California on steroids, maybe.
Really? Oh,
if that helps.
Yeah.
It is the most leftist state in Australia. It would be the most radically anti-Catholic state in Australia. The leadership, the intellectual elite, the political elite is very anti-Catholic. And I think that was also a factor. Cardinal Pell, of course, as the great sort of confessor of the faith in Australia, was the number one political enemy of every leftist intellectual in the country.
Yeah.
And those people are very powerful in the state of Victoria. And the police actually put out advertisements asking, does anyone have any dirt on Cardinal Pell?
Really?
It was a trawling exercise, yes.
My.
So,
That's
yeah.
amazing. Oh, and I must admit, I think it was his brother David. I just want to share this from his essay because I wrote "wow" in the march, and but he's talking about this, and he says many issues were identified. For example, there are a couple of thousand Vatican employees, yet there were over 40,000 enrolled to receive benefits from the Vatican pharmacy. And he talked about initiating new accounting procedures and that he had identified 1.2 billion euros that had not been previously accounted for. I mean, so, and he talks about his office and Cardinal Pell's office and apartment being bugged. His phone was bugged. It's like, oh my God, it's like, you'd never think of this kind of intrigue in a sense, going on with a guy who's trying to root out fraud in the church, right? I mean, it's like, it was amazing. So, and so kind of the idea, and boy, I thought I read somewhere, Dr. Rowland, I don't know, you might be able to clarify. I thought I read somewhere that years later, they were able to maybe trace some money going from Rome to Australia in this whole, allegations against him. So there might have been some bribery involved.
Yeah. I don't know the latest on that news story, but certainly there was a news story that I think the figure was something like 20 million.
I think so.
I think that was the figure. I could be wrong, but certainly a substantial amount of money was transferred, or it was reported as having been transferred from the Vatican to Australia.
Yeah.
And people were trying to trace that and see what happened to it, but I haven't heard.
Yeah.
If
they found
anything was uncovered.
Yeah. So, So what ends up?
I mean,
go ahead.
Only like those statistics you read out of $1 billion.
Yeah.
Like this is not people stealing petty cash.
Yeah.
This is systematic fraud.
Exactly.
On a huge scale.
Yeah.
And people who are engaged in that degree of dishonesty don't care about telling lies.
Oh,
they don't have a problem telling lies.
Right.
They don't have a problem being nasty.
Yeah. So kind of the way it plays out then, right, is that there are then there are allegations made against Cardinal Pell on sexual abuse, personally, his own abuse of someone, and also that he covered up sexual abuse that he knew of. And so he came back to Australia from Rome to kind of, combat those charges. And he really, and I felt bad for him because he had such faith in the justice system in Australia. He really thought, well, this isn't going to be a problem because I can go back there and just kind of take care of this. So he has numerous trials, right? Because I think he appeals numerous times and until it gets like even to the highest court, but he spends over 400 days in prison, in solitary confinement. So what was going on that, he ends up getting convicted, is sent to jail, sent to prison, and yet it gets all the way up to the highest court, and they vote 7-0 that this was a sham. So all of those years, what was going on there?
Well, I think one thing that has been going on is I mentioned the character of the state of Victoria. Judicial appointments, there's for a long time now, the judicial appointments have been made often with reference to political criteria more so than professional competence criteria.
Right.
That's one factor. Another, although there was one judge on the Court of Appeal who was an excellent criminal lawyer, and he just said this is rubbish. The one judge on the Court of Appeal, so there were sort of three levels. So the first level, there was a jury. And now you, the allegation that was made was that the sexual offence was alleged to have occurred in the sacristy at the cathedral after a high mass.
Okay.
And various people were able to prove just how impossible that would have been. You know, the idea that you would sexually attack someone in a sacristy immediately after a high mass. There's people walking in and out. You know, how many people are there at a high mass, and how many altar servers are there?
Right.
You know, how many vessels are there on the altar that get carried back into the sacristy after a high mass? Like the idea, if you were going to sexually assault someone, that's the last kind of venue that you would choose.
Sure.
You know, you would have to be completely barking mad to try and
Yeah.
and engage in that kind of criminal offence in that context.
Right.
You know, if you were going to do something of that nature, you would isolate the child, and you would be somewhere where there's not a couple of thousand people milling around.
Right.
You know? But you've got 12 people on a jury, and I don't know how many of those have ever been inside a cathedral, who even know what a sacristy is, who have any concept of what a high mass is. What a lot of people felt in the community was that somebody needed to pay for the negligence of the Catholic Church in relation to the child abuse victims.
Sure.
There was this really strong sense in the community that somebody should pay for this. And many people thought it should be Cardinal Pell, because he's like the CEO, you know. He's like the leader, you know. This organisation allowed these terrible things to happen. Who was the leader of the organisation? Now, most of these things happened at a time when Cardinal Pell was not a powerful person at all. But whatever of that, the average person in the street who wasn't a Catholic did have a sort of sense of, well, somebody should pay for this. And for many people, Cardinal Pell seemed like the obvious person, since he was the leader of the Catholic group, so to speak.
Right.
So there was a kind of scapegoat mentality, you know, and people often said, you know, I don't care whether he did it or he didn't do it, but somebody should be in jail for the things that have happened.
Man.
You know,
Yeah.
So there was that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And there was also the mentality of, sadly, liberal Catholics who couldn't stand the cardinal because, you know, they wanted church teaching to change on this or that issue.
Right.
And, you know, he was defending the magisterial teaching. And so it didn't really bother them that he was in jail.
Right. And it sounded like the media didn't like him either, right?
Yeah, the media didn't. The media were delighted. Most members of the media were delighted. It was a big story, and like a big fish was taken down. So it had a lot of public drama value and front page news value, you know. So it was like a perfect storm of factors. But after the jury said guilty, it then went to the Court of Appeal, and the judge on the Court of Appeal, who had a background in criminal law, said it's ridiculous, and wrote a very, very strong, he's innocent sort of judgment. And then, but the other two judges kind of just sort of upheld the decision of the jury. And so it then went to the High Court, and all 7 judges said this is ridiculous, in effect.
Right. So I read somewhere, and I can't remember, it might have been David's essay, but where like the person who was bringing these against him, charges against him, like changed their story like 20 some times.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true. I believe that there was even a change about what color wine was.
wow.
I think there was something about wine being spilt, and altar wine being
Sure.
spilled, and the person changed the story because I think the question was put, what colour was the altar wine?
Yeah.
And then it was able to be proven that that colour altar wine was not used at the cathedral in those years.
Yeah.
And so then the person changed their story. And,
yeah.
there was a whole lot of things like that.
Wow.
Where facts were changed.
Yeah. So that kind of takes us to this over 400 days that he spends in prison. And I have his diaries. I haven't gotten to read them yet because I'm reading books to interview people. So tell me, what do you, because the book, there's so many people that were amazed at the way he handled this prison time. What to you was amazing about it?
Look, I wasn't surprised by the way he handled it because it was more of his sort of keep calm and carry on sort of attitude. And he had a doctorate in church history, and he knew a lot about church history. And so he was well aware of how many bishops and cardinals have been unjustly accused of things over the centuries and ended up in prison. So it's sort of like par for the course.
Right.
If you're really effective, then the devil tries to take you out. And if he can't get you one way, he'll try and get you some other way. And so I think that, the cardinal just thought, well, they falsely accused Christ of things. They crucified Christ, and, what they've done to me is to put me in a prison cell. But he apparently got to know the other prisoners, and some of them really, really liked him. And the way he heard that he had been vindicated by the High Court was that he heard cheering from prisoners in the other cells.
Oh my gosh.
And so he knew that the decision was to be handed down on a certain date. But when he heard all the cheering going on in the other prison cells, he realized that somehow they had heard the news and it was good.
That's amazing. He was in, was it kind of, they said solitary confinement, and he couldn't say mass or have, that had to be very difficult for him.
I'm sure not being able to say mass was the very worst thing. Yeah.
And one of the things, again, this was from Paul Kelly in the book, he says, which I thought was amazing when he talked about, when Pell talked about his time in prison, he said there was no sense of resentment, no trace of bitterness, no complaints about judges or politicians, no obsessions about an outrageous injustice. On the contrary, Pell shared anecdotes about his time in prison, even told jokes. He had an appreciation for the sufferings of those who had accused him. He had offered up his ordeal in prison for the sins committed against young people by the church. I thought, what a witness for all of us, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, he wasn't bitter at all. But I think that's because he understands that like the powers and the principalities, as St. Paul called them, are always opposed to the people who are close to Christ.
Yeah.
And, persecution is just what we should expect, really.
Yeah.
And so, he had that attitude, and he had a deep faith, a very deep faith.
Yeah. I found it very interesting, too. One of the, I think it was one of the ones later in the book, talked about Cardinal Luan van Tuan, who I
yes.
had interviewed his sister a couple of weeks ago for a book out on him. And I thought about because I remember years ago interviewing somebody who on the North American Martyrs or something, and they were saying, well, saints tend to run together. I mean, they kind of end up in the same circle sometimes, because they're about the same things. And I thought, oh my gosh, to see that Cardinal Tuan was with Cardinal Pell, and that they were kind of buddies and sharing their experiences at prison time. And then this is where this concept of white martyrdom kind of gets introduced in some of these essays. What do you think about that in the sense of understanding that?
Well, I think that it is true. I've often thought of writing a book about saintly friendships. Which saints were friends with which other saints.
Yes.
I have often thought of writing a book about that. You're right. People who are saints tend to have people in their circle who are similar types. And Cardinal Pell loved that Vietnamese cardinal, and there is a beautiful oil painting of him in the church in the hotel in Rome that Cardinal Pell had built, basically. So there's a church, there's a hotel in Rome called Domus Australia.
Oh, yes.
And Cardinal Pell got the Australian bishops to put money together to buy a hotel in Rome that would become a pilgrimage centre for Australian tourists. And there is, of course, a chapel in the hotel. And the chapel is really beautiful. And there is an oil painting of the Vietnamese cardinal in the chapel there.
His story's amazing. Yeah.
But the white martyr thing, I think Pell was definitely a white martyr. I think that poor Cardinal Zen was a white martyr, is a white martyr.
Yes.
I think that Cardinal Zen is one of the most heroic men I've ever met in my life.
Oh, wow.
Just being in the presence of Cardinal Zen is like being in the presence of a superhuman sort of character. He is so intelligent, and like Pell, he has a sense of humor and a kind of deep understanding that, the powers of evil are real.
Right. Yeah.
And there are people who absolutely hate Christ, and there's no amount of diplomacy or dialogue or we love you or we want to be friends that is going to turn those people into someone who likes or wants to be a Christian.
Yeah.
Nothing, you know.
Yeah.
And that's just something, I think people who have grown up in so-called free countries in the last 50 years find hard to appreciate.
Oh, yeah.
But people who are old enough to have lived through communism or fascism understand that there are people who are just so evil that dialogue doesn't help, diplomacy doesn't help.
Yeah, no compromises. Yeah.
No compromises. And poor Cardinal Zen, he says that the current Vatican policy on China is, in his words, herding the faithful Chinese Catholics into a communist cage.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
And I think, we need to pray for the faithful Chinese Catholics, because I think there are many white martyrs among them.
I think you're right.
And Cardinal Zen is certainly one of those.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So we've got about 4 minutes or so left, Dr. Rowland. There is something I do want to share, though, because I went to talk a little bit about his funeral, but there's a line in here. Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott readily agreed to offer some words of remembrance after communion, and he amusingly quipped that the demonstrators chanting, "Pell, Pell, go to hell," were the Cardinal's first miracle, because he had convinced them of the reality of the afterlife. I love that. I thought that was a great line. But tell us a little bit about that funeral experience.
It was, well, first of all, I can remember getting a text on my way to the cathedral from a friend to say that the bomb squad had just been into the cathedral to check that there were no bombs, and that the police had said it's okay, it's safe to go in.
Oh, wow.
So, I've never been to a funeral before where you have to have the bomb squad turn up to check it out.
Yeah.
But to get into the cathedral, one had to go past, I don't know, maybe 100 people chanting, "Pell, pell, go to hell." And they kept that up. And when the casket was leaving the side of the cathedral to be taken down into the crypt of the cathedral, they kind of got going again, more "Pell, pell, go to hell." But they were also drowned out by the Lebanese community. Many members of the Lebanese community couldn't fit into the cathedral. The cathedral was just packed, to maximum capacity. So a whole lot of young Lebanese Catholics who couldn't get inside the church just stood outside the church and sang hymns. And their hymns were drowning out the "Pell, pell, go to hell" people.
Yeah, that's great. Excuse me. So I just want to thank you, Dr. Rowland. This has been, I could talk to you forever about this because this was an amazing book. Thank you so much for putting this together and taking on this project, because I encourage people that they want to get a taste of Cardinal Pell. This is a great book that tells us lots about him. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And yeah.
And I've been to Steubenville a couple of times.
Oh, yeah.
So I've sort of been in your neck of the woods.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, because I go to Steubenville for conferences every now and then. Maybe I'll run into you sometime.
Yeah.
So I want our guests, our audience, to know that on his tombstone, Cardinal Pell has, "He loved Christ and the church vehemently." May that be said about each one of us. Our guest today was Dr. Tracey Rowland. She holds the St. John Paul Chair, second chair of theology at the University of Notre Dame in Australia, and many other wonderful things. So please, 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 you might want to take a look at this book. It really tells you a lot about the heart of Cardinal Pell in a world where there is a lot of evil, but we are called to remain strong in the footsteps of Christ Jesus. So have a great week ahead. You've been listening to The Virtuous Life. I'm your host, Pat Odie Murray.